I've got a camera.
You have a special place in my heart because you were the very first student on Web Yeshiva.
Oh, thank you very much. Wait a minute, I'll put it on.
Okay, everybody else can hit send video as well. And we'll start in 1 minute.
Yeah, I've got the camera. Okay, it's on.
Okay. So good evening to everyone else that's on, from near and from far. Good evening. Here we are, our second session, trying to understand the Rambam's history of the Torah She-Baal. Last time we had a little bit of introduction, and then we got into this principal text, which is the Rambam's Hakdama Mishna, his introduction to his Mishna commentary. And we saw this notion that the Torah received by Moshe was repeated and taught at least 4 times in this kind of process where Moshe learned it from Hashem, and Moshe teaches it to Aaron, and then it's taught to Aaron's children, then it's taught to the Shivim Zkenim, and then it's taught to all of the people that were thirsty for Torah, and then each of those people in turn, in a kind of trickle down, a type of dominoes, each of them, first Aaron and then Aaron's children and then the Zkenim, the elders, and then the elders to the people, each of them in turn would take a turn as teacher of Torah, so that every halacha, every piece of Torah, every explanation, every mitzvah was taught over 4 times. And again, the Rambam is trying to fortify the notion that the Torah She-Baal Peh, the oral tradition that explains the written Torah, and we're going to get a little bit deeper into the relationship between these two as we move along, even already tonight, that the oral Torah has integrity. It's part and parcel of the whole experience from the moment that Moshe comes down from the mountain. Now, when Moshe comes down from the mountain, what does he come down with exactly? We're going to have to see that soon. We all might have some type of notion of what Moshe received on Har Sinai, which may not be the whole story. Saul asked the question last time. I'll review that in a second. I just want to remind everybody that as we move along, if there's anything at all that's not clear, if a term that I'm using is unfamiliar to you, feel free to give me a heads up by either shouting it out or by chatting. And the advantage of the chat is you can chat privately to me so that only I'll see it and no one else will have to understand that you didn't understand what I was talking about. It's one of the ways in which Web Yeshiva is actually superior to a conventional classroom. Conventional classroom discourages people from admitting that they don't know what's going on because of the fear of embarrassment. Here there is no fear, since it's just between you and me, and your classmates never need to know. Before I get to Saul's question, I just wanted to look around. There are a few people that are new to me. We have Ben and Barbara. I don't even think I have a video. Do you have a camera? Or a microphone? Are you out there? And then Barbara, can you at least chat us and let us know? Chat us and let us know where you are. No, you have no camera and no microphone. Okay, but where are you? And also Rachi Hain, let us know where you are. Okay, thanks a lot. Matityahu. Okay, you're with us in Israel. And Rachi Hain, if you're out there, let us know who you are and where you're from. Everybody else is familiar to me from the previous days. Okay, last time Saul asked a question. He said, "Where's Yehoshua?" At the end of this year, he asked, "Where's Yehoshua?" And the Gemara talks about the Rambam talks about this chain of Moshe. Hashem gives it to Moshe. Moshe gives it to Aaron. Aaron to Aaron's children. That is the Canaan to all of the people. But what about Yehoshua? After all, we all know the very first Mishna in Pirkei Avot. Where is that first Mishna in Pirkei Avot? Here's the Pirkei Avot. I'm sorry I don't have it up on the screen for you, but it's unnecessary since it's so well known. The very first Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, Moshe Kibel Torah Misinai. Moshe received the Torah at Har Sinai. Umasra Yehoshua, and passed that to Yehoshua. Yehoshua lives Kenim. Kenim Nevi'im. Nevi'im Masra Anshe Knesset HaGedolah. Haim Amnu Shlosh Advarim. Anshe Knesset HaGedolah. They had three mottos, as it were, three teachings. And then the Masechtas gets into the teachings of the different Chachamim. This seems to be, at least on the surface of things, a contradiction to the Rambam's tale. The Rambam talks about Moshe to Aaron, Aaron to Aaron's children. And the Mishnah in Avot talks about Moshe to Yehoshua, Yehoshua to this kingdom. So I don't think it's a contradiction. You'll see, hopefully before the end of the evening, we'll see that, hold on one second. We'll see that Moshe, that Yehoshua is about to make an appearance. So just, hold on for that. But I don't think there's a contradiction. I think the Mishnah is talking about the historical chain of who was responsible as the head agent of Torah in any generation. When Moshe dies at the end of when Moshe dies at the end of Sefer Devarim, Yehoshua takes over as the head Navi, as the head teacher, as the head representative of the Torah. The Rambam is describing the process of what's going on in the desert during the 40 years in which the Torah takes on the form that it does and that it will. Because we'll see in a minute for the Rambam, the experience of Har Sinai. I'm sorry, I apologize. I was trying to fix the camera and I must have blocked the microphone. Again, the Mishna's description at the beginning of Pirkei Avot, Moshe to Yehoshua, Yehoshua to the Canaan, is talking about the historical chain, the periodization. At any different generation, who was the Baal HaMasorah, who was holding the keys to the Torah She-Baal Peh at any given point. The Rambam is talking about the first 40 years of how the Torah was disseminated in generation 1. And we'll see as we move along for the Rambam, the experience of Sinai is something of an ongoing experience. Because we'll see that this notion that Moshe received the entire Torah on Shavuot at Har Sinai is not exactly the whole story, at least not according to the Rambam. So let's get into it. The Rambam continues and says, after these 4 levels of teaching that he described in the first paragraph, Yafutsu ha'am lilamed ktatam l'ktatam ma sheshamu min hashaliach. Moshe to Aaron, Aaron's children is Canaan to all the people. Then all the people go and they learn the Torah that they heard from the Shaliach. Right? That's the, in this translation of Rav Shirat. Again, I remind you, this text was originally written not in Hebrew. We're reading it in translation. It was originally written in Judeo-Arabic, the lingua franca of the Rambam's day. So here he translates whatever the Arabic term is as shaliach. Moshe is called the shaliach, the representative, the messenger of God. And the people would take the Torah, the whole Jewish people, 600,000 adult men, their wives, their children, in the desert, v'yichtavu ha-mikra b'megilot. And the mikra that they heard, the verses that they heard, the Torah that they heard, they wrote in Megillot. So what's a Megillah? Megillah, we hear about Megillah Esther. Well, what's a Megillah? What does the Rambam mean by this? The scroll, right? That's probably the literal. But what's the concept here? They wrote it in Torah scrolls. No, they wrote it in their notebooks. In other words, to write something on a Megillah was, I guess, tantamount to like whatever your notebook was, not like our electronic notebooks now. But that's how you kept notes. You had a piece of paper. And you wrote on it, and that was the manner in which you kept it, because they didn't have codexes, books with a binding that you kept on a shelf. That's how books until the medieval period. That's how books were kept in scrolls. So the people, they would write down what they heard, but what they wrote down. This is not a Sefer Torah. This is not a Sefer Torah. It's not a Torah scroll. And people, the leaders, the leadership, were sent around throughout the whole Jewish people, throughout the whole encampment in the desert, to teach and to shanen. Shanen means to repeat, repeat the Torah, because the Torah is learned through a type of repetition. Right? We say l'shanen v'shinantam levanecha. Right? It's a synonym for teaching, but it's a type of teaching. Ad asher yed'u al peh zeh hamikra, until people knew it by heart. Yidakteku b'kriyato, and they would be precise in the reading. They knew how to read the Torah text. Yilamdu gam perush zeh hamikra, and after they knew the mikra, what we call the Torah shebichtav, the text of the Torah, then they learned the perush, the explanation. Anatum me'et Hashem. Again, the Rambam emphasizing the integrity of the system. Also making a pedagogic point. First you read the Mikra, and then you read the Perush. There are different schools of thought, historically and in contemporary Jewish education, about the proper way to go about learning Torah. The Mishna, there's a different Mishna Avot, the well-known Mishna Avot, Ben Chamesh LeMikra. A 5-year-old starts learning Mikra. Mikra meaning Torah Shebichtav, the Tanakh. Afterwards, you start learning Mishnah. Afterwards, you start learning Gemara. But first you read the Tanakh. Now, most schools don't teach that way. When we start teaching Chumash, we automatically, immediately start teaching. Learning Chumash is usually synonymous with learning Chumash and Rashi. And what does it mean to learn Rashi? What does it mean to learn Rashi? Commentary, but what type of commentary? Perush, right? And as Rashi is an anthology of the Perush. The Perush being the distilled Torah She-Baal Peh, to learn what Chazal said the Psukim mean. And that's very common how Torah is taught. In other schools, here in Eretz Yisrael, it's probably a little more common than in Chutz La'aretz, but the school that my children go to, Orot Etzion here, the Barkai method, which you may have heard of, there's a Barkai school in Brooklyn now and elsewhere, where they try to follow, with some flexibility, they try to follow the dictates of the Mishnah. And when they start learning Chumash, they start learning Chumash. They start learning with the Betin Bereshit, and they learn the whole Chumash. And essentially, they're really just learning the Pshat, the Chumash Neto. They don't have, when they're small, they don't have a Chumash with Rashi even. Only later do they go back and start learning Rashi. And that, you can point here to the Rambam as a support for that school of education. וזה הפירוש, כללי עניינים, והיו כותבים המקרא, ולומדים על פי הקבלה. They would learn the Mikra, and then they would learn the Kabbalah. So what's the Kabbalah? With the Kabbalah they're learning now, they were like Madonna. It was like, I don't know, who are the other celebrities that are into Kabbalah these days? They were learning Jewish mysticism? What does that mean? That they were learning Kabbalah. Kabbalah. Torah She-Baal. Right? In other words, when the Rambam here says Kabbalah, it has nothing to do with Jewish mysticism. It's the antithesis of Jewish mysticism. Right? Only later will that term come to be synonymous with mysticism, with the Zohar and with other things. When the Rambam says Kabbalah, he means Mash Anachnu Mikablim, the received tradition, the received interpretation. That's what the Rambam means, not mysticism. They would learn the Torah Shebichtav, and they would learn the Perush HaMikubal, the accepted, received interpretation of that verse. V'kach omrim hachachamim aleim hashalom, Torah Shebichtav, the Torah Shebaal Peh. Where do the Chachamim talk about Torah Shebichtav and Torah Shebaal Peh? That's the Gemara in Shabbat that we saw last week about Hillel and the Ger, or the Ger and the Shammai, and the Ger and Hillel, where he says, how many Torot yesh lechem? How many Torahs do you have? And the Shammai says, we have two, Torah Shebichtav and Torah Shebaal Peh. These two parallel systems, a written black and white text, and the accepted tradition, accepted interpretation of that text. Amru Arayim HaShalom B'Vraita, V'daber Hashem El Moshe Bahar Sinai. This is a well known to us from Rashi at the beginning of Parshat Bahar, which we usually read in at the end of the spring, beginning of the summer. Bahar usually comes out like in May time. Bahar Sinai. Ma Talmud Lomar Bahar Sinai. Why does the Torah teach you the laws of Shemitah? Parshat Bahar tells you the laws of Shemitah, the sabbatical year, Shemitah and Yovel. And it says that Hashem said them to Moshe, Behar Sinai. So what does the Torah need to tell me that it's taught at Har Sinai? Zehalo. But behold, indeed, in fact, Kol, let me turn the page, Kol HaTorah Kula Ne'emra B'Sinai. So what does it have to tell you that the Torah was given at Har Sinai? If these halachot were given at Har Sinai. Lo Malach Hashem, Ma Shemitah, Ne'emra Koroteh U'Prateh V'Ditziteh Misinai, Af Kol HaMitzvot Ne'emru B'Koroteh U'Prateh V'Ditziteh Misinai. So just like Shemitah was given, and all of the details and all of the explanations here in Parshat Bahar were given at Sinai. So everything was given at Har Sinai. Everything was given at Har Sinai. Because there's certain things in the Torah which are spelled out in greater detail, and there are certain things in the Torah which are spelled out only by a hint. They're hardly spelled out at all. So Rashi says, just like Shemitah was given at Sinai, everything that was given at Sinai, everything that was taught to Moshe was taught with a commentary. And then the Rambam gives us an explanation. Lamashal, an example. Lamashal, Omar Lecha, Sha'Hashem Amar Lo, Basukot Teshvu Shivat Yamim. There's a pasuk that says, Parshat Emor. It says, Basukot Teshvu Shivat Yamim. You should sit in the sukkah for 7 days. What does that pasuk mean? What does that pasuk mean? No, Basukot Teshvu Shivat Yamim. Sit in the sukkah for 7 days. What's our problem in understanding that pasuk? Right. Well, you need an explanation. I mean, there are at least two problems in these 4 words. Imagine, let's create a character. I don't know, we need a name for him because we're going to refer to him again and again and again. Imagine a guy who lands from Mars. Who is that little green Martian on the Flintstones? Alan, help us out. Remember the Flintstones? There was that Martian that came, little green guy. Nobody has any Zacchaeus? Oh my goodness. Alright, we'll have to figure out his name. A Martian lands from Mars. And he gets to Earth. And he's tired after his journey, so he checks into a motel. And in the nightstand in the motel is a Bible. So let's imagine for a second he ignores the New Testament and he just focuses, he's a pretty frum Martian, he just focuses on the Chamisha Chumshei Torah, on what's labeled the Old Testament. Yes, correct. The Great Gazoo, very well, very good. Okay, so the Great Gazoo is joining our shir. I'm sure Alan will send us all a link to the Wikipedia page about the Great Gazoo. So he lands. He doesn't know anything about Judaism. He doesn't know anything about Torah. He just has the Bible. He's a Karaite. He just has the Torah Shebechtav. People are asking different questions. A question like why 7 days? That's a philosophical question. A question like Alan, you're pretty good. A question like why 7 days is a philosophical question. You want to know what the Torah, why the Torah says something. But Shivat Yamim, in that half a pasuk, Sukkot Teshu Shivat Yamim, the 2 words that we do understand are Shivat Yamim, or at least we assume we understand them, because we know what a Yom is, and we know what Sheva is. Right? So we know what Shivat Yamim is. You can ask a philosophical question. Why 7 and not 8? Why 7 and not 6? Why 7 and not 1? Right? But that's a second level. That's a second tier question. Before you can ask a question like why, you first have to ask the question of what. You first have to understand what the word means. And in this pasuk, at least 2 of the words are completely unclear to us. Or are completely unclear to the Great Gazoo. The Great Gazoo will have a dictionary that will translate from English or from Hebrew to Martian language. So Shivat Yamim he'll understand, but Sukkot Teshvu he won't understand. And Sukkot he won't understand because he doesn't know what a Sukkah is. You can't translate it into Martian. Teshvu he'll understand, but he'll get it wrong. Because the word literally means sit, and that has nothing to do with the halachot of Sukkah, as we'll see in a second. So before you can ask the why questions, first you have to understand the what questions. What is the pasuk talking about? So the Rambam says, here's the mashal, here's the example. Sukkot Teshu Shivat Yamim. V'achar kach hodio, after Hashem told him, after Hashem dictated the pasuk. Right? Moshe is just the secretary, right? He's giving God-given dictation. This is the Sukkot Teshu Shivat Yamim. So Moshe writes down Sukkot Teshu Shivat Yamim. And then afterwards, Hashem informed him. Hodio Yitarel, the exalted one, informed him. Kizot Hasukah Chova al Haskarim v'lo al Nekevot. He taught him the halachot. He taught him the Torah Shabbat Peh. That Sukkah is mandatory upon men and not upon women, although women, of course, are allowed and encouraged to sit in the Sukkah, but it's a mitzvah aseh she'azman grama. Ve'en hacholim chayavim bo, v'lo hochei drachim. Not everybody's obligated to sit in the Sukkah. If it's difficult or impossible for you to do the mitzvah, you might be exempt. V'lo yesh schachara me'atzomeach min ha'aretz. And he explained what the schach is, what that stuff on the top is, etc., etc., etc. And he taught him all of these halachot. The kasher ba hashaliach, when Moshe came, nitna lo zot hamitzvah uperusha. When Moshe then comes down and he teaches Aaron, and then he teaches Aaron's sons, and then he teaches his Canaan, and he teaches all the people, he teaches the Pasuk. He says, Sukkot Teshvu Shivat Yamim. And the people wrote that down in their Megillot, in their notebooks. But he also taught the explanation, because when he said, all right, listen up, folks, Sukkot Teshvu Shivat Yamim, what do you think the first thing that happened was? That annoying student in the front row, that's the greatness of the WebYeshiva, nobody's in the front row. But the annoying student in the front row, his hand shut up. What did he ask? What do you think he asked? No? You're that student in the front row. Moshe says, but Sukkot Teshvu Shivat Yamim. What's your first question? No, what should be your first question? Okay, Esther, what's the first question?
What is a sukkah?
What you said, did you exactly? What does that word mean? What does that word mean? Right? What's a sukkah? What's the definition of a sukkah?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So Moshe taught the explanation. The and this was true for all 613 mitzvot. Moshe taught the text of the mitzvah, the pasuk, and then he taught the explanation. The people would jot down in their Megillah notebooks the psukim and the explanation, all of these halachot of what a sukkah is, that was preserved orally. Now, the Rambam chooses the example of sukkah because it's a wonderful example. Here's the pasuk, a Sukkot Teshvu. Right, I marked Sukkot and Teshvu in color because those are the problematic ones. Right, Shivat Yamim, we think we know what that means. But what's a sukkah? We need to know what's a sukkah. Right, so you want to say, sukkah is like what they lived in the desert. There wasn't. Somebody wants to say that there's no problem because sukkah was a concept that they knew because they lived in Sukkot. It is not connected. This is not connected to the question that Rashi quotes that's in the Gemara, the Machloket, whether it was Sukkot Mamash or Ananei Kavod, whether or not the people dwelled in actual Sukkot, or whether the sukkah is a metaphor for God's divine canopy, the clouds of glory that protected them in the desert. But the other pasuk says, "Kiva sukkot hoshafti et bnei Yisrael b'hotzi'otam me'eretz Mitzrayim." God says, "Sit in Sukkot because I caused you to dwell in Sukkot when you left the desert." So there's a machloket whether the Sukkot that Hashem housed us in when we left Egypt, or whether it's talking about actual Sukkot or it's a metaphorical Sukkah. This is not connected to it, but the point being that we imagine that Sukkot, that what a Sukkah is something that's known to them. Like if I were to say to you, everybody should live in a penthouse. So we all have a conception of what a penthouse is. Right? If I say everybody should live in a doghouse, we all have a conception of what a doghouse is. We would all draw a picture of a doghouse, and all of our pictures of the doghouse, right, if we were to upload them right now, they'd be more or less the same. They would all probably look something like, what Snoopy on Charlie Brown, slept on top of. And if we had to draw it in color, likely we'd draw it in red, although not necessarily. It's our night of associations with great cartoon characters. We had the Great Gazoo, now Snoopy and Charlie Brown. But this is not true. It's not true that there's a common notion of what a sukkah is in the desert. First of all, we have a different pasuk. Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov mishkenotecha Yisrael. First of all, they didn't all dwell in Sukkot. They dwelt in tents, or at least some of them dwelt in tents. Some of the time they dwelt in tents. The habitation in the desert, it's not clear what that was. And maybe a sukkah was not at all what we think a sukkah was, right? Because the Torah, not in Har Sinai, not in the Midbar, earlier in Sefer Bereshit, talks about Yaakov Nasa Sukkota, Vayiven Lo Bayit, V'Limiknehu Asa Sukkot. And that's why they call this place Sukkot. There's a place called Sukkot. It is called Sukkot because Yaakov built Sukkot there. But what's a sukkah? What does the word sukkah mean in the context of Yaakov Avinu? It can't be what we're talking about for this halakha, right? There can't be necessarily connection. No, a sukkah is not a house. A sukkah is a barn. A sukkah is the place that they put the sheep. The bayit is the place that the people live, right? He builds the even low bayit. For himself, he builds a house. But for the flocks, he builds a sukkah. So maybe a sukkah. I'm trying to figure out intertextually, right? You know what intertextual means? It means we look in the Chumash to understand what the Chumash is talking about. There's a word sukkah, I'm not sure what it means. So let's see what else sukkah means. So here's another sukkah, but here a sukkah means something else. It means a place where the animals live. Right? I want to know, well, what did they live in the desert? So I look around, I see, well, it's a tent. But what do we know? Let's imagine that we do know what a sukkah is. What do we know about a sukkah? We know that it's not a tent. We know it's something else. So we're still at a loss. We're still at a loss to understand what the sukkah is. The Rambam says, how do we know what the sukkah is? We know it because it came with an instruction manual. But the instruction manual was Ba'al Peh. It was oral. There was an oral tradition that explained the sukkah is this. It has to be this high. It has to be this wide. It has to have this much space area. The sukkah has to have walls. It has to have a certain amount of walls. On the top, it has to have the schach. The sukkah is called sukkah al shem haschach. Al shem haschach. The covering, which has to be material that grows from the ground, that's disconnected from the ground, etc., etc., etc. Without the oral tradition, there's no way to make sense of certain things in the Torah. Some things are clear. Shivat Yamim, that's clear. We know what that means. Once you know what it means, then you can ask all the philosophical questions you want. What is the meaning of the number 7? But Sukkah, we don't know. And there's another problem. What does it mean? Teshvu. Teshvu could mean to sit there. So what if I don't want to sit there? I'll stand up for the whole week. Right? Does it mean that whenever I'm in the sukkah, I have to be sitting? What if I want to lay down? Does it mean I have to sleep in the sukkah in a chair? I'm not allowed to lay down in the sukkah? No. Teshvu means something else. It's different than sukkah. Sukkah is a problematic word because we don't know what it means. Teshvu is an even more problematic word because we know what it means, but we don't know what it means for the purposes of this halakha. So the Torah She-Baal explains Teshvu means not literally to sit, although we also do that in the sukkah. Teshvu means Teshvu ke'ein taduru, that you should dwell in the sukkah, that you should turn the sukkah into your salon, into your dwelling place, and you should do in the sukkah all the things that you normally do in your house. You should eat there, you should sleep there, you should spend your time there, you should entertain your guests there, you should read your book there, you should have your cup of coffee there. Right? Teshvu is a symbol word. It's telling you something about the activities, but it means more than what it means black on white, or in this case blue on white, literally in the pasuk. The Rambam said that Shemitah is the example. That just like Shemitah is spelled out in great detail, all the mitzvot, all 613 mitzvot, are spelled out in great detail, even though some of them are only hinted at in a whisper, as it were. There's a Mishna in Masechet Chagiga that really kind of is very evocative in this sense. Heter Nidarim. There's a halacha about Nidarim. Hold on a second. Before we move on, let me look at some of these questions. Chaim wants to know about singing a song to that pasuk. I'm not sure. Chaim, if you'd like, can we give you the microphone? You'll sing it for us. So Sherry wants to know, how does the Rambam know all this? Yeah, it's also part of the Torah She-Baal. It's part of the received tradition about how the tradition is received. It's possible, Sherry also asks, is it possible that Yaakov's sukkah he built for the animals is not the same as sukkah according to the instruction manual? I mean, it's possible, but not likely. I mean, there'd be no reason to do that. I mean, it could be that, there are commentaries that say such things for homiletical purposes, but the pshat of the pasuk means here that sukkah means like a corral or like some type of barn or something where you put the animals in at night. There's no reason to assume that. And Chaim asks another type of philosophical question. I don't think so. Okay, not sure about that. The Mishna Chagiga says, Heter Nedarim porchim ba'avir ve'en lahem al mash v'simchu. There's certain halachot, like Heter Nedarim, which they're kind of like floating in the air. They don't really have textual anchors. And there are other types of halachot, like Hilchot Shabbat. You know what Hilchot Shabbat are? Hilchot Shabbat is very complicated. Hilchot Shabbat has a lot of details. It has more details than Shemitah. You see all those books behind Alan? Right? Alan sits there, he's got those books behind him. Sometimes I think it's just like a painting on the wall. We don't know if those are real books. And all those books behind him, so like a lot of them have to do with Hilchot Shabbat. Right? Hilchot Shabbat is a complicated thing with a lot of details. It had a lot of details when it began, and it's only gotten more complicated ever since. Because the Mishna talks about the malachot, but the Mishna doesn't know about electricity, and it doesn't know about elevators, and it doesn't know about modern hospitals and how you might run a modern hospital according to the halakha, and it doesn't know about lots of things. So Hilchot Shabbat is one of those areas that gets more and more complicated as we move on, because the applications grow exponentially. There was this discussion, where was it? It must have been online someplace. I don't recall where I saw it. You know that the next stage of prosthetic devices will be about. There was in the National Geographic, in the most recent National Geographic, there was a cover story about mind and machine that we're really like on the verge of real bionics. Like remember the Bionic Man, where God forbid somebody loses a limb, and it's replaced with a mechanical arm. Yes, right. It was correct. It was in the Jerusalem Post, right? And so somebody was there. It was like a theoretical question because this is not for real. This is not for real. I saw it online on the Jerusalem Post. If somebody has the link, you can send it. So there was a theoretical discussion amongst some rabbonim about what will be, about the electronics of like when you have a mechanical arm, which obviously has some kind of a battery or something, but it's controlled by your mind. So like what'll be for Shabbat when that will come, and then that development is really we're on the verge of that. We're really on the verge of that. It's not as science fiction as it seems. Right? So this is a question which is a reason why Hilchot Shabbat gets more and more complicated instead of less and less complicated. So the Mishna says Hilchot Shabbat, Chagidot, V'Amilot, different categories of halachot. I'm not going to go into the details. Harei Heim Kehararim Hatluyim B'Se'ara. These are like mountains dangling by a thread, dangling by a hair. Shehein Mikra Mu'at, the halachot merubot. Shabbat is hardly mentioned in the Torah relative to some other things. We learn out all of the halachot of Shabbat. We learn out the idea that there's melacha, or we learn out at least what the parameters of melacha are through the Torah She-Baal Peh. So the Mishnah has this very delightful phrase that Shabbat is like a whole mountain being held suspended by a thread, or suspended by one hair. The weight, the gravity of Hilchot Shabbat has only the faintest textual resonance in the Torah Shebichtav, in the Torah itself, black on white, but yet connected by a small optic fiber, as it were, is the entire mountain of Torah She-Baal Peh. Of Torah She-Baal Peh. Since we're here anyway, let's look quickly at some other things the Rambam says. In the introduction to the Mishna Torah, which is also worthy of study, introduction to his great halachic code, the Rambam writes, Kol ha-mitzvot shenitnu lo la-Moshe b'Sinai b'Perushan nitnu. Every mitzvah that God gave to Moshe was given with explanation. Shneimar v'etna lecha et luchot ha'even v'ha-Torah v'ha-mitzvah. Torah is the Torah Shebichtav. Mitzvah is the Perusho. V'tzivanu la'asot ha-Torah al pi ha-mitzvah ha-mitzvah zu hi ha-nikret Torah She-Baal Peh. So that kind of built into the system again. The Rambam keeps singing the same song, trying to strengthen this notion of the integrity of Torah She-Baal Peh and Torah Shebichtav. That the two go together. That they're two halves of the same whole, and that there's integrity to the system. And again, there's no doubt that part of the reason the Rambam emphasizes this so is because of the encounter with the Karaites, who denied the integrity of the Torah She-Baal Peh. And he mentions other cases. Here's another example about shchita, right? Ritual slaughter, or merely the kill an animal so it's kosher, which is, after all, like one of the defining mitzvot of Judaism, kashrut. The central detail of kashrut is also learned out through the Torah She-Baal Peh. Going back to the Rambam now explains, and this is crucial for us. So the Rambam until now has been describing how Torah was taught and learned in the desert. Vayihi b'sof ha'arba'im shana b'rosh chodesh Shvat. Right, at the end of the 40th year, on Rosh Chodesh Shvat, Hikilam alav shalom v'amar lahem hinei karav zman moti. Moshe gathers together all the people. It's 5 weeks before he dies, and he says, "Listen, folks, I'm about to die. Whoever heard something from Moshe and forgot it, yavo v'yishal v'avarenu lo. Come and I'll explain it to you. Umi shenistapka lo she'ela. And anybody that has a doubt about a question, yavo v'avarenu lo. Come and I will explain it." So there are two reasons somebody might have a question. Either you learned something and you forgot it, or you have a new question and you want to know how to apply the laws that you've learned to your new question. Amar Katuv Ho'il Moshe Be'eret HaTorah Hazot Le'mor. This is the very beginning of Sefer Dvarim. Sefer Dvarim is Moshe's farewell speech, in which he summarizes, restates, recapitulates the entirety of the Torah. Moshe begins to be'er, to explain, to elucidate the Torah. The Torah is already given. The Torah is already taught. Right? It's the end of the journey, and Moshe is niva'er. He explains the Torah to anybody that has questions. Kol sheshachach halacha achat yavo v'yishneh, v'chol sheyesh lo lefaresh yavo v'yifaresh. It was like a great Torah fest, those few weeks. Everybody came and asked, everybody came and learned, everybody came and taught, everybody came and explained. Ve'imtu mipiv hashmuot, ve'lamdu perushim b'meshech oto hazman shemirosh chodesh Shvat ad Shiva be'adar. Until the 7th of Adar, we're right now in this period. We're between Shvat and Adar. Right? Zion Adar is in a month from now. Zion Adar, the 7th of Adar, is Moshe's yahrzeit. Ka'asher haya lefnei moto, higash lektiva. And at this last period, he sat down and he started writing. V'katav shlosha asar sifrei Torah gedirim. He wrote out 13 identical copies of the Torah. This is the Sefer Torah. The 40 years in the desert, they didn't have a Sefer Torah the way we think of a Sefer Torah. Midet Bereshit Ad Lamed B'Yisrael, right from the beginning, what we call the Torah, we call the 5 books of Moses. From the Bet in Bereshit Bar Elohim until the Lamed in Le'enei Kol Yisrael at the end of Parshat Zot HaBracha, he wrote these 13 copies of the Torah. Why 13? Natan Sefer L'Kol Shevet, V'Lechet B'Drachav. One copy was given to each of the 12 Shvatim, the 12 tribes, so that they should know what to do. And the 13th was given to the Leviim, who did not dwell in one centralized Shevet, but lived throughout the people. But since the Leviim were kind of the spiritual leadership, the teachers, so they also got a Sefer Torah. For certain things, the Leviim are considered a Shevet, and for certain things they're considered outside of the framework of the 12 Shvatim. But for this purpose, they got a Sefer Torah. Every Jew was somehow connected to a tribal Sefer Torah. V'amar lahem, Moshe says to them, v'koach et Sefer HaTorah, achar kach ala lahar b'chatzot yom b'shiva b'adar, and Moshe then passed away. Moshe then passed away. But the Rambam here is coming down on the side of Rabbi Yochanan. There's a machloket in the Gemara in Gittin, Daf Samech Omer Aleph 60a, about how the Torah was given. There are two schools of thought. Either Torah Chatuma Nitna, the Torah was given in one chunk. The Torah was given in one chunk at Har Sinai. Now, that opinion that the Torah was given in one chunk at Har Sinai, which is, by the way, what many people think. Maybe it's what you thought. Maybe it's what you think. But the idea that Moshe got the whole Torah at Sinai, even according to that opinion, it doesn't necessarily mean that he got this whole book. Because if Moshe got this whole book at Har Sinai, from the Bet in Bereshit to the Lamed in Le'enei Kol Yisrael, if he got this 7 weeks after leaving the desert, and they still had another 40 years in the desert, what's the problem with that? With the strict understanding of this opinion? Oh, so how do you know about his own death? Too many things happen to change things. Right? It's like the old Back to the Future problem. he got the book in advance, so he also knew that in a couple of days there's going to be the Chet HaEgel. Why didn't he go and stop it? He also knew that in a couple months there's going to be, a couple weeks, there'd be the Chet HaMeraglim. He would know what's going to happen. Right, the spies, Linda writes. He would know that when he sends these guys, these spies to Eretz Yisrael, it's going to end in disaster. He could have, should have stopped it, etc., etc., etc. So even the opinion that says Torah Hatuma Nitnu, it was all given at once, you can interpret that opinion to say the halachic material, all of the mitzvot were given at once, but that the narrative portions of the Torah, those were written down, those were codified, they were sanctified, they were canonized rather. They were canonized into the Torah itself as they happened. After a certain event would happen, after the Chet HaMeraglim, let's say, Hashem said to Moshe, oh, well, let's write this up. This tale is so important that we need to preserve it and make it part of the Torah. So even the opinion of Torah Hatuma Nitnu, that all 613 mitzvot were given in one shot at Har Sinai, that doesn't mean that Moshe knew what was going to happen before it happened, because otherwise we might have written history differently. But the other opinion, Torah Megillah Nitna, the Torah was given piece by piece, as it were. That Hashem didn't teach all 613 mitzvot at Har Sinai. He taught certain things, the Ten Commandments and a few other principles, and what he taught was the system of Torah She'Ba'al Peh, the explanation of things, but also the mechanics by which the Torah can and should be interpreted first by Moshe and then by all of the Chachamim that would come after him. Moshe gives to Yehoshua Shmicha. There's that evocative scene towards the end of Moshe's life where he places his hands on Yehoshua's head. He somech his hands on Yehoshua's head, and he passes over something to him, and Yehoshua now becomes the leader. Chaim points out that there were mitzvot that were given before Har Sinai, not just Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh was already given in Mitzrayim. But before they get to Sinai, in Marah, which is their first stop. Remember, they only get to Har Sinai. Har Sinai Shavuos is 7 weeks later. Right? No, there also points out there were certain mitzvot. That's a different question. There were certain mitzvot that were given to the Avot, Gid Hanosha and Puravu and Bikur Cholim, etc. So they were given to the Avot, but they become obligatory on us once they're restated in the Torah. But there were mitzvot. Shabbat was given at Marah. Right? The mitzvot of Shabbat were given as they come out of it. We didn't wait 7 weeks to get the mitzvah of Shabbat. And even if Shabbat was, I'm not getting into the question of did the Avot keep the whole Torah, because there is such a tradition in the Midrash that the Avot, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, they kept the whole Torah. Right? So when it comes time when Hashem gives the mitzvah of Shabbat, it's not like no one had ever heard of Shabbat before. But the question is, what becomes the source of our obligation? Even according to the opinion that the Avot kept the Torah, it was a type of voluntary act, not an obligatory act. So that the Torah at Sinai, according to the opinion that Torah Megillah Nitna, the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, the opinion which the Rambam apparently agrees with, the Torah is given, the mitzvot were given, spread out over the 60 years. They're written down in these Megillot, and only at the end does Moshe rather, with Hashem's instruction, obviously, put them together into the one organic Sefer Torah that we that we have and that we know and that we love. Clearly, Sefer Dvarim, the fifth of the 5 books, a rather large book, is said and taught and given and written only at the end of the 40 years. So I guess you could have an opinion, and there are some that hold this opinion that no, Moshe, everything was told to Moshe up front, and he somehow didn't let it affect how history unfolded. There's a different question about the 8 psukim at the end, the last 8 psukim of the Torah, which both describe Moshe's death and what happens after Moshe dies. And the Gemara gives a few different possibilities of what that was. I'll just tell you now, as we're ending, I apologize. The next 2 weeks, I will be traveling in America. And although in principle I could teach from America, I hear they have internet there. On those 2 times, I'm not going to be in access to a computer. I'll be on an airplane or at Rabbi Rousman, our good friend and colleague and teacher, and Rabbi Rousman will be substituting. I believe he'll be addressing these topics of the last 8 psukim in the Torah and perhaps other related topics to this. And then when I come back, we'll continue where we're leaving off. But let's just kind of summarize that the Rambam says. If you'll bear with me for just a few minutes, we'll just end this here. The Rambam says that when Moshe dies, Kasher Meit Alav Shalom, Ukvar Masar Yehoshua. Here's Yehoshua. Saul, here's the answer to your question. Where was Yehoshua? Here he is. Before Moshe dies, he passes over to Yehoshua, Mashnatan Lo Min HaPerush. He passes over to Yehoshua the keys to the car, the instruction manual, the oral tradition of interpretation, and Yehoshua becomes the standard bearer of it. It borein bo Yehoshua v'anshe doro. V'chol ma shetzibel mimenu hu v'achar hazkenim ein bo dinu dvarim v'lo nafla ba machloket. And there was no machloket. Everybody initially, we'll see, it didn't say this way, everybody initially remembers what Moshe had taught. There's this question. Where does machloket come from? Anybody that's ever learned even just one Mishna knows that this Torah She-Baal Peh, it seems something is a record. If it's Torah She-Baal Peh, you receive tradition, so how could there be machloket? How could it be that one Chacham says this is the halacha and one Chacham says that's the halacha? Initially, there was no machloket. There was no difference of opinion. There was one organic Torah She-Baal Peh, a clear instruction manual. Not like the instruction manuals you get when you buy a new digital camera. You can't make any sense out of it. There is no machloket because Moshe taught it initially. Later we'll see machloket enters the system. But what about things Moshe didn't teach? Moshe was a fantastic teacher. But the Torah is so... Excuse me one second. The Torah is so vast and so deep and so profound, and there's so many applications to things as we described. So new things came up. Anafim, branches, right? The image of a tree with a trunk that branches out and separates out into different areas. So when new topics would arise, when a new thing would branch out, so they would have to learn out the halacha from scratch. The chukim ha-13 hanitunim lo b'Sinai, the 13 midot shehatorah nidreshet bahem. We'll come back to this afterwards. The 13 principles. If you have everybody has a siddur. In the siddur, in the morning davening, before Psukei de Zimra, after Birkot HaShachar, after the morning blessings, before Psukei de Zimra, we have Rabbi Yishmael Omer b'Shloshes Milot HaTorah Nidreshet Bahem. The 13, that are often translated as the 13 hermeneutical principles. Hermeneutics means the manner in which you interpret a text. So the 13 principles of interpretation. This is a brisa from the Sifra. the Sifra, the work of Midrash, Halacha, and Sefer Vayikra. Rabbi Yishmael teaches there's 13 principles by which the Torah would be learned out in the cases where it didn't have already an interpreted tradition. Chaim points out there are other lists. This is one of the most famous drasha, perhaps because the most famous brisa, because it's listed in the Siddur, so we know it. But there are other additions, other versions of hermeneutical rules as well. If you have access to an Art Scroll Siddur, this is the Art Scroll Siddur has actually a very good explanation of these principles, and then it gives you examples of each and every principle and a law and a source that learns something out from each principle. So until we meet again, you might want to look at that, and we'll get more into these 13 principles. When Chazal learns things out through these principles, is it derivative or attributive? Does that learning become the source of the halacha, or does the halacha exist and becomes rooted in this interpretation? Chaim has the Art Scroll here in the footnotes in the Art Scroll Siddur. In the footnotes in the Art Scroll Siddur, at the bottom, they go the 13 rules. They list each of the 13 rules. If you go to our Shir homepage, you can download this if you don't have an Art Scroll Siddur. But right here on these pages, the Art Scroll gives examples of at least one application of each of the 13 principles. It's worth your attention. It's worth your attention. So again, I apologize. 2 weeks, Rabbi Rousman will continue with you on some of these side topics worthy of your time. Please do participate in those shiurim. I will continue when I return. Laila Tov.